Okay, welcome to Cajun Connection. I'm your host, John Behrens.
And I'm Joshua Perkins.
So, week 2. Anything that stood out to you about LSU?
LSU, I felt what stood out by me. I'm gonna start with some pros. They were able to shut out Southeastern. The front seven disrupted the backfield very well against Southeastern. Offensively, there's still a lot of inconsistencies they got to work on. A lot of inconsistencies, same inconsistencies that I saw in the Miami game. I'm just going to put it out there. Week 3, they got to go against the Auburn Tigers in the Tiger Bowl. And if LSU put up the same performance against Auburn that they put up against Southeastern, then they can get smoked this weekend because Auburn, they got a quick front seven. They got a pretty good quarterback in Jarrett Stidham, who's starting to make a name for himself as one of the better quarterbacks in the nation. LSU still has a lot to work on. Also, not having Caleb Vaughn chasing for the rest of the season kind of has to make them shift gears. Defense they're going to be solid no matter what. It's just the offense. With Joe Burrows, I still need to see more from him. He needs to have more trust in his offense. A play that stood out to me was the last play of the first half where he threw that bomb to one of his receivers to Sullivan, which I felt was a more like a trust fall. But LSU's 2-0. They're trying to make a case for themselves. They're going to have a lot of statement games this season because a lot of people did not give them a chance this season. And so they got a chance to make a second statement against Auburn this weekend.
You know, I actually got to listen to the first half. I was at work for the game. Yay. We'll see whether or not that becomes a trend. Probably. But, I was a little bit more impressed with Burrow. His ability to move around kind of surprised me. It was Southeastern, but at the same time, we haven't really seen a quarterback that can move outside the pocket and pass for a while.
Well, I mean, with LSU, it's always been one or the other. They've either had like a strict pocket passer who really didn't have a lot of mobile skills. I mean, you look at guys like Zach Menberger, or dual threat, which that hasn't worked out. You look at Brennan Harris and Anthony Jennings. But to have a guy who can do a little bit of both and have that pretty good mix, Joe Burrow is that guy. One thing I also like about Joe Burrow, and what I saw in the Miami game, he has really good command of the line of scrimmage. Clock management, I feel that's something that they kind of improved on against Southeastern because they had a hard time, getting the ball out in time, which forced LSU to use all 3 timeouts in the first half. In the first quarter, actually. But Joe Burrow still has a lot of room for improvement, and I feel that it's just going to come with experience. It's going to come with every game. I mean, I feel that we're going to see a gradual improvement in LSU as a team. They may not be contenders this season, possibly not, but definitely next season, especially with the recruiting class they got coming in 2019.
Yeah. Again, another good time or a solid running game. What was a bit concerning was the fact that, of course, I didn't see this, but it is my understanding that they were running 8-man protections against a team like Southeastern.
Well, I feel it's just LSU trying to run their game plan. I feel it's just they doing it to get ready for Auburn. They doing it to see how well it will work and to see, where they got to improve on as far as the 8-man protection is concerned.
I kind of heard Matt Moscona talking a little bit about, who has a better D-line, Southeastern or Auburn.
I mean, honestly, I don't think that's a question at all. I would say that Auburn has a much better defensive line. They have a very quick front seven. They also have a pretty good quarterback in Jarrett Stidham. But as far as Auburn is concerned, LSU is going to be dealing with a much faster-paced team. They're going to be at the War Eagle. They're going to be in Auburn. And so it is going to be hostile environment. This is going to be Joe Burrow. It's probably his first game starting in such a hostile environment. Because playing at Auburn, you can ask teams like Alabama and Georgia. It's not easy going in there to beat the Auburn Tigers. It's one of the hardest things to do in college football is to beat Auburn in their territory. And so LSU has a tough task in front of them. They had a hard time with Auburn last season at home. They had to overcome a 20-0 deficit. But I'm confident that LSU has what it takes to go in there and pull out the victory.
Yeah, they don't exactly have Leonard Fournette to come in and run over the Tigers this year.
But they do have Nick Brossette. We're gonna see how tough Nick Brossette really is. We're gonna see how calm under pressure Joe Burrow is. We're gonna see. This would probably be one of the first game, like probably the first game we see Joe Burrow handle absolute true pressure.
So, out of the running backs, I do like Nick Brossette. He has been rather consistent. Well, it's only been 2 games, but hey, at least triple digits both games. What about the rest of the core? I still have not seen a lot from well, I think the next one would be Clyde Edwards, Elaire.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Leonard Fournette. I mean, I haven't been seeing a whole lot from them. I mean, due to the fact Nick Brossette has been really carrying the load as far as getting the offensive yards and getting the rushing yards. Because with Nick Brossette, one thing I like about him is his ball carrier vision and the way to burst through holes, pick up speed, and just being able to get the yards that LSU needs in order to keep the drives going. And so LSU never really had to rely on Clyde Edwards-Helaire a lot, nor Leonard Fournette. And so, of course, this is probably going to be a trend that we're going to see going forward is, Nick Brossette getting a load of the carries and him probably carrying the offense depending on how Joe Burrow does.
I'll be honest. It's a bit hard to get a real reading on the SEC at this point. It seems like teams that should be up or down and teams that should be down or up.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm just going to start with Alabama. Alabama, they handled Arkansas State with ease, 57-7 this past weekend. A team that I was able to kind of really get a really good look at was Texas A&M. They took Clemson to the wire, and I honestly felt that Texas A&M got robbed in that game. There was a play where there was a big play from Kellen Mond to one of his receivers. His receiver fumbled, the ball went out of bounds, and the referees ruled it a touchback. And I'm not a big fan of Texas A&M, but even I knew that was a bad call. Texas A&M is going to be a team that I feel is going to be on the radar in probably the weeks to come. This is going to be a very competitive team behind Jimbo Fisher. With Florida, I figured after their Charleston Southern game and how precise Felipe Franks was in throwing 5 touchdowns, I figured that Florida was here for the long haul, that they were, they have a pretty big turnaround coming along, but they lost to Kentucky for the first time in over 30 years. So Florida still has a lot to work on behind Dan Mullen.
Oh yeah, well I was kind of looking a little bit more at do Tigers play Kentucky this year?
No.
Okay, so they play Georgia
They
and
play
they
Georgia.
play Florida.
They're going to Gainesville to play Florida. They're going to be playing in Georgia at home. And I think that's.
I don't think that's going to make a difference. I don't honestly. I think they can hang with Georgia for at least the majority of the game, but at this point, I'm still giving that to Georgia.
Well, I would have to give it to Georgia because of how strong they are. I mean, I was looking for South Carolina to upset Georgia, and I figured that South Carolina had the team. They had the squad to beat them, but Georgia manhandled South Carolina pretty well, 41-17, and that just goes to show against a pretty good, talented South Carolina team that Georgia can still bust a team up. And Georgia, they're still in my pick, Georgia's going to represent the East again in this year's SEC title game.
After Florida, yeah, Florida, Kentucky, I could definitely say that.
As far as the West, I mean, of course, Alabama's a front runner, but of course, I mean, a team behind them would be Auburn. You got LSU, Texas A&M. I'm really looking forward to LSU and Alabama this year. I feel it's going to be a lot different, especially being in Tiger Stadium and LSU.
Well, the games at Tiger Stadium against Bama always seem to be a lot closer than the ones in Tuscaloosa.
Oh, most definitely. Well, LSU has a lot of momentum on that side. It's just with Alabama, it's not as far as trying to get the offense going and defense, trying to make stops. It's just get, Nick Saban, his main thing as far as playing in Death Valley is get the win by any means necessary. And so it's like the stats don't really point out to him. He don't care about stats. He don't care about, this play and that play. It's just try and get that victory. And I mean, the last time Alabama came into Tiger Stadium, LSU held them scoreless for the first 3 quarters. And Lane Kiffin, who was offensive coordinator at the time, had to dig real deep into his playbook. And I mean, over the past 10 years, what team can honestly say they held the Alabama offense scoreless through the first 3 quarters? Nobody.
Yeah. So we actually don't have to stray very far to go around the state. You had Louisiana Tech played Southern this past weekend, which I was surprised that the Jaguars were actually able to make it a game up front. They pulled within 7 points, 21-14, and then just fell apart in the second half.
Well, I mean, that goes to show the difference between FBS and FCS. I mean, SWAC, I don't want to, like, teams like Southern and Grambling, they're good in their own prime, but it's as if when they step out of the SWAC, when they step out of the HBCU,
Right.
part of the area, that's where you really start seeing, okay, how good are these guys? Can they compete?
Because it looks like the Jaguars have the potential to be a really good team. I mean, if you can hang with like a Louisiana Tech for a half, I mean that should be able to translate to the SWAC pretty well, you would think. I mean, TCU, Louisiana Tech, you really can't get a reading on this Jags team right now.
When you look at Southern and Grambling, those are the flagship teams as far as the SWAC is concerned. I mean, I'm talking about as far as football is concerned, bands. I mean, the full 9. And, I mean, we take a look at Grambling. I mean, this is one of the best teams in HBCU, and Grambling's off to an 0-2 start after losing to my alma mater, Northwestern State, 34-7, which was a good revenge game for the Demons. Under first-year head coach Brad Laird, last season, LSU traveled to Northwestern State traveled to Grambling and lost. And Grambling, we're talking about a team that was nationally ranked. So, I mean,
and so we have UOL coming up, and they're going to be playing the Mississippi Bulldogs. I don't know. That's just
ULF.
That's Mississippi State all the way.
But I mean, ULL, they could probably make it a game probably for the first quarter. But of course, with Nick Fitzgerald, who is a highly touted quarterback, who's a dual threat, I don't see ULL having a chance in this game. Mississippi State came off a pretty impressive 31-10 victory against Kansas State on the road this past weekend. Well, Mississippi State, I mean, it just, impressive victory, but it shows that there's a little bit more work to be done if they want to compete in the SEC.
Yeah, and then ULM plays Southern Mississippi this weekend. They're 1-1, and the Warhawks are actually 2-0.
And I mean, honestly, getting that victory over Southern Miss kind of surprised me due to the ULM. They almost lost to Southeastern. It was a 34-31 victory. Also going around, as far as Louisiana, let's kind of talk about Tulane for a second. In week 1, they almost beat Wake Forest. They took the Wake Forest Demon Deacons of the ACC in overtime. Tulane played against Nicholls State. Nicholls State, as for those who remember, upset Kansas in overtime in week 1. Nicholls State was able to make quick work of. Tulane was able to make quick work of Nicholls 42-17 in this weekend's contest. A little bit more college football. Texas barely beat Tulsa. Texas won 28-21 over Tulsa.
But okay, enough delay.
All right, to the elephant in the room.
What? Whoa.
Saints defense. Oh, did I say something?
What was that? I mean, we sat here and talked up the Saints defense all preseason long.
And the Saints defense, I mean, we're talking about Saints defense. Last season, they had no problem getting to the quarterback. Okay, they had a pretty good secondary, a young secondary who's not yet in their prime. Ken Crawley, Marshawn Lattimore. Then, they also have Marcus Williams, and then they added Patrick Robinson, who's evolved his game since leaving the Saints after his first stint. They signed Kurt Coleman, which will add much-needed veteran experience to the secondary. Not only that, you bring back A.J. Klein, you bring back Cam Jordan, you trade up in the NFL draft to get Marcus Davenport. You also got Demario Davis, who's an all-pro linebacker from the New York Jets. So adding all those pieces to a well-oiled machine defense who basically they had to do a lot of improvisation. They had to shoot from the hip last season due to the injuries they suffered. I mean, losing Kenny Vaccaro to injury. They lost AJ Klein for a while to injury. They lost Alex Anzalone to injury. First game, I believe second or third game of the season. I think it was against Miami, in London. And so this was a wounded defense, a young defense, and Des Allen, he had to really shoot from the hip, and the Saints were able to finish with a top 20 defense. And
they tied for ninth, sir.
You know what I mean. And so you look at it, all eyes were on the Saints defense this season. Were they going to be able to duplicate last year's performance or even be better? I mean, my prediction was that they were going to probably be a top 5 defense this year due to all the pieces they added. But they went out there this past weekend against Tampa Bay and looked like the worst defense in the league. I hope Saints are listening. I'm going to roast the Saints. I am roasting. I'm letting all my frustrations on this podcast. I'm sorry, John, but you have to bear with me.
I mean, they did come out and look a little bit like they were in record form,
I mean, remember 2015? Didn't they break a record for worst defense in NFL history that season?
Mr. Peabody decided to show up with his Wayback Machine and take us way back to 2015.
Yeah, I mean, and the cornerbacks they wanted to channel their inner Brandon Browner out there, and Marshawn Lattimore got smoked by Mike Evans. Mike Evans went for 7 catches for 147 yards.
He allowed Fitzpatrick to complete a pass of 50-plus yards.
And Fitzpatrick was 21 of 28, 417 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, and I'm going to say it right here, right now, and John, I don't care how you feel about what I say. I don't care what the listeners feel what I say. Though Ryan Fitzpatrick played a really good game, I give credit to Deshaun Jackson. He's always been one of the more elite receivers. He kind of fell off a little bit, but he's a receiver that he's always been one of my favorite receivers. Mike Evans, he was a highly touted receiver coming out of Texas A&M, playing with Johnny Manziel. And ever since going to Tampa Bay, he's been a major contributor in the receiving core. Deshaun Jackson was a much-needed contributor in the receiving core. They've made good careers out of being the best that they can be. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm not going to give him any type of credit. Yeah, he played a good game. I give him that. He played an amazing game. He was absolutely nearly flawless in that game.
Well,
But see, here's the thing. If he would have played like that his whole 14 years, he wouldn't have had to go through 7 different teams. Any quarterback who's willing to play like that on a weekly basis, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. Now, of course, every once in a while, you're going to have an off night. You're going to have a game where it's just nothing is going for you. That's football. That's just how it's going to go. But if you're so I guess no game has been a game for Ryan Fitzpatrick for the whole 14 years except for this past Sunday. So yeah, I'll give him credit for that game. Hey, play a good game. Good job. But you still not elite.
No, I don't think anybody is going to consider Ryan Fitzpatrick elite after that.
They came up with Fitz magic. And so okay, we're going to see how because Dirk Cutter said after the game, Fitz magic is alive and well. Okay, keep that same energy because Philadelphia is going to be in Tampa this Sunday. And Philadelphia has Malcolm Jenkins. They got Fletcher Cox. They got, who else? Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby, Chris Long. So yeah, please, keep that same energy when Philly comes to town. We're going to see the defending Super Bowl champs led by Doug Peterson. So, Mr. Cutter and Fitz Magic, let's hope they keep that same energy when Philly comes to town. And I know I sound salty. The Saints, that's been my team since I was 6 years old. And to see them just play like that was probably the worst defensive performance I've seen.
It was probably the worst defensive performance I've seen that I can remember. Now, no, I've seen worse performances than that. But, I mean, this is a stacked defense that just came out and didn't show up. I mean, they did just, stuck cardboard cutouts on the field or something. Like, even Cam Jordan didn't even show up. What the hell was up with that?
I mean, it was bad. I mean, this was a Saints defensive line that I had a lot of hopes for. You look at the Saints D-line, Cam Jordan coming from an all-pro season. Marcus Davenport back in UTSA, he was just bum rushing offensive linemen, but it just goes to show with him coming from, coming from the Western Athletic Conference coming, he didn't even come from a Power 5 school. But I mean, if you look at his film, the guy was an animal. He was a freak of nature. He did not show up in that game. Absolutely nobody showed up in that game for the defense. And I know I'm going off on a tangent. I apologize for that. But here's my thing about it, and here's why this season is so important. Because a lot of people for the Saints, a lot of people are saying Super Bowl or bust. Super Bowl is the Saints' ceiling right now. That is their ceiling. But if the Saints don't get it together offensively, quick, fast, and in a hurry, then all the moves they made in the offseason is going to be nothing but an absolute waste. The GMs, basically the season's going to be nothing but it's going to be all hype, no action. And that's why it's so important, because they made so many moves this offseason, including having to trade up in the draft in order to put this defense together, and to go out and not show for it. That's honestly a slap to the face of the fans, and that's a slap to the face of the Saints front office, who worked so hard in the offseason. I mean, the Saints front office, other than the Browns, that Saints front office led by Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson worked their tails off this offseason to get the players that they need, to get the players that they want, to be able to put together a team on offense and defense in order to make sure the Saints can ensure success this season. And for the Saints to not show up, that was a huge slap in the face of that front office. I don't care what anybody say. I know it's a podcast. I gotta try and remain biased, but unbiased. But
what else can you say? I didn't watch the game. I worked throughout the whole thing. Like I said, we actually texted back and forth while I was on lunch break during the first half, and the defense must have started making plays at some point, because the offense almost made a game out of it.
They did, honestly. Well, what really put the Saints back in the game, the Saints were down 48-32, and Tampa Bay had put together a drive. Well, Tampa went for a field goal with Catanzaro, who was automatic all game. He had missed the field goal, which was kind of a chip shot, considering how good of a kicker he is. Drew Brees was able to just drive the team back down the field, and they scored a touchdown. They were down 48-24 in the fourth quarter. They were able to force some 3-and-outs. And with Drew Brees, and honestly, I thought we were going to see a repeat of last year's Washington game, where they were down by 16 points with 3 minutes left in the game, and Drew Brees, put the team on his shoulders, drove them down the field. The defense buckled down, and they were able to make some stops against a very tough Kirk Cousins-led Washington offense. And the Saints looked like they were putting together a comeback. And if they would have came back and won that game, it was going to be probably one of the most miraculous comebacks in NFL history. 24 points in the fourth quarter, it would have been crazy. And knowing Drew Brees, whenever he catches fire, you cannot stop the man. When you're going to start thinking he's possessed. I've sometimes questioned Drew Brees' humanity. Because Drew Brees, in the Saints' final 2 drives of that game, Drew Brees was not missing. Drew Brees was automatic. And it just comes down to this. When the Saints came within 8 points because they had scored a touchdown, 2-point conversion. They scored another touchdown, 2-point conversion. And the Saints didn't do an onside kick. They kicked it off because they had enough time. It was 3 minutes. It was like 3 minutes and change left when the Saints were down by 8. All the Saints had to do, and the Saints, they were out of timeouts because they had to use that last timeout to do the last 2-point conversion. All the Saints had to do was make one stop. They had a 2-minute warning to stop the clock. All they had to do was make one stop. 3rd and 11, Ryan Fitzpatrick rolled out. He was in the pocket. He was getting chased. He ran that ball and ran for a first down. And after the 2-minute warning, there was no stopping the clock. Tampa Bay won the game.
Yeah. Well, at least the offense looked good.
Oh, the offense looked amazing. Drew Brees, 37-45, over 430 yards and 3 touchdowns. But that's what happens when you got to put the offense on their back. And the loss of Mark Ingram for the first 4 games, it really showed in that game. Well, because with Sean Payton, his concern with Alvin Kamara, that he didn't want to use him too much to the point where it was going to haunt the Saints later in the season. He didn't want to do too much wear and tear to Alvin Kamara. But what I'm thinking of is Alvin Kamara's only in the 2nd season. He's not even in his prime yet. Use him as much as you want. He's there. He don't mind the workload. But then again, Alvin Kamara didn't get a big workload at Tennessee. He was a complimentary back. And so I feel that's where it comes into as far as the snaps and want to use other running backs in place of Mark Ingram, which didn't go well. Mike Gillespie fumbling and really put the game out of reach for the Saints. So I mean, and
Jonathan Williams didn't really show up either.
I mean, and honestly, here's how I feel. Why would you put Boston Scott in the practice squad? Well, first off, why sign Mike Gillislee if you already got guys like Jonathan Williams and get Boston Scott? Boston Scott, that's another Darren Sproles prototype. Boston Scott would add another dimension to that Saints offense, because you look at a guy who could run the ball, good breakaway speed, good, as far as, he's good as far as breaking through the holes and getting yards the Saints need. With him being so short, he's fast, and honestly, in my opinion, he's a very lethal back. Not only that, he's a guy you could put out in the slot and kind of like a shorter version of Alvin Kamara, you could say. And so, I mean, they wanted to make room, but I felt that cutting Boston Scott, they made room for the wrong running back, in my opinion.
I don't know. I mean, it is just the first game. There is time for improvement, and there's definitely a need for improvement. Well, here's to next week, which is the Browns. So,
and the Browns, they tied with the Steelers.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have time for today. I'm your host, John Behrens.
I'm Joshua Perkins, and once again, I know I went off on tangents, but look, you got to understand my frustrations.
Yeah. So, next week, Auburn, LSU to Auburn, and Saints, Browns come to the Dome. Also, we have a little bit around the state with, I think, Southern.
They're going against Langston this
Langston.
weekend. They'll also be honoring Pete Richardson, who was their longtime head coach, who also led them to their first Black National Championship in 2003.
Yeah. You can find us at on Twitter at AI Sports 3. We're also on Facebook, AI Sports. And we also have our own website, aisportsnetwork.com. Tune in next week.